Hello. Hi, welcome. So this is People of Substance by LemonSkies, our very first ever edition. So the idea and the goal here is to introduce you to some interesting substantive people in the nonprofit space. And we'll certainly touch on best practices in fundraising and donor stewardship. But the goal is also to just get to know some interesting people. I will do introduction here to Jeremy Reis, Rice like the food. He taught me that immediately. So he's my very first guest. So I really appreciate you taking a chance on me here. So let me just kind of tell you about Jeremy, and then I'll let him speak and introduce himself. So Jeremy Rice, so you're Senior Director of Marketing at World Concern, dealing with poverty issues. But we'll touch on a lot of other things that you do, and we'll get into that momentarily. So Jeremy, please introduce yourself and tell us what is it that you do?
Olga, thank you so much for having me and having me as your initial guest. I hope that people enjoyed this episode and really come to get to know both of us and kind of how what we do in the fundraising space. So as you mentioned, Senior Director of Marketing at World Concern. So I'm over all of fundraising for World Concern. We're a Christian relief and development organization working in Haiti, Africa, and Asia. And so all of the aspects of fundraising from direct mail to digital. We've got a separate major donors team, but I speak into strategy for that. So all of those aspects of fundraising I'm responsible for there at World Concern. So excited to be here today and to talk through, a little bit about myself, but more about some of these fundraising principles as I'm really passionate about increasing generosity so that organizations can raise as much money as possible to help as many people as possible.
Jeremy, how did you end up in nonprofit space? Because I feel like few of us grow up intending that as a professional path. So what led you here?
So that's a funny story. So I was working in consulting in Columbus, Ohio, and I was in MBA school. And I remember in one particular class, and it was organizational management. And in that particular session of that class, the professor said, okay, we're going to talk about managing nonprofits. And I thought in my head, I can tune out now because I will never work for a nonprofit because nonprofits are crazy. And so we moved from Columbus down to the Charlotte area. This was 2008, 2009 timeframe. And I got a job working at a nonprofit. And it was as crazy as I thought it would be, but it was good crazy. And so from that experience, I met a man named Tim Smith, who became the Chief Development Officer at Food for the Hungry. And so then I went from, I actually had left this particular nonprofit that I was working at, went into consulting with some nonprofits, did some consulting at Food for the Hungry, and then came on board as a full-time employee. So like many people in the sector, I've not, did not grow up in the nonprofit space, but I've really enjoyed my time in the nonprofit space. And I think the turning moment for me was in 2013, I was in Guatemala. It was my first trip to Guatemala and visiting a community there. And I went into the house of Tomasa was the mom, and Maritza was this sweet little 18-month-old girl. And I heard the story of this family. And when Food for the Hungry had entered this community, this little girl that was 18 months in front of me was 13 months old at that time and weighed 7 pounds. Mm-hmm. And it really broke my heart because I have 8 kids and none of them have ever weighed 7 pounds, not even at birth. And here, this little girl was 13 months old weighing 7 pounds. So they got her the medical help she needed. They taught Tomasa how to grow a garden, how to feed her nutritious foods. And now I'm watching this 18-month-old just dancing and singing and carrying on to the radio. And at that moment, my life changed. And I said, it's not enough for me to go back to corporate America or go back into consulting or go back. I need to, change my life's direction and really focus on fundraising. And that got me the passion to really to start fundraising. And then years later to start helping other people and to teach them what I learned as a fundraiser.
So Jeremy, you mentioned how many children?
8 children.
Tell me about that. How many? What are the ages?
Yeah. So we've got 19 down to 2 years old. We've got 4 girls, 3 boys, and then our baby is a girl. It's a fun ride. So I was the middle of 5, and my mom was the oldest of a bunch, and my wife was just her and her sister. And so we thought 5 was our number. and we had 4 girls in a row. And then when number 5 came, he was a boy. And so we thought, oh, we got to, get a brother for our Elijah. And, I don't know that you can program that, but we ended up with 2 more boys in a row, and then finally a girl. And, it's a fun adventure. The 19-year-old's still at home. So we've got 4 teenage girls under the same roof, which is fun, but they're great kids. We homeschool, and, it's just been a blast. And, I might need to get them sponsored through one of these child sponsorship programs with as many kids as we have.
So, what is dinner like in your house? How do you produce enough food to feed 10 people?
Yeah, so it is a interesting chore. So what we typically do is whatever we make is what we make, and if they don't like it, they can make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for themselves. But there are a couple of meals that are kind of go-tos that we know everybody likes, and our kids have a pretty wide palate. They'll eat anything from Indian food to sushi. I mean, they've got a pretty wide palette of things that they'll stand. The funny things that they don't like is chili. There's a couple of the kids that don't like chili. But I think ground beef and beans are 2 things that when you combine them, that oftentimes the kids won't eat. So, most nights I would say, if there's not craziness ensuing and we just tell them to go make their own food, most nights, somebody will pick up the responsibility to make a big enough dish to feed everybody. And if a particular child, like we've got one that's a vegetarian, if they don't want to eat what we're making, then they can find something else to eat.
Yeah. This is amazing because I just know what it's like to shop for my 2 children, and how much groceries I try to bring in the house, and how much I end up spending time in the kitchen. So this is amazing.
Pretty funny doing that weekly trip to Trader Joe's, and then I don't know how many times a week to Kroger, but it's a big grocery bill in our house, especially with those boys.
Oh my gosh, yes, and sports. So Jeremy, here's what I want to ask you, and I've been dying to ask you. You're doing something that few people in nonprofit space do. Lots of consultants produce content because that's kind of our business. That's how we let the world get to know us. But few people who actually work full-time at a nonprofit are doing that. And you've written, let's see, I wrote it down. I have a cheat sheet here. You've written a couple books, Magnetic Nonprofits most recently. You have a podcast, The Nonprofit Answers. You write pretty regularly articles for your blog. I see a lot of content from you on LinkedIn. There's a cartoon strip, like a kind of like a newspaper strip.
Yep.
And then most recently, you started releasing animated series, which we'll come back to. That's where it's unpacking. So when do you find time? And can you talk a little bit about that? And why do you think more people in nonprofits are not producing that sort of content?
Oh, great questions. So it was about 2018, and I was on LinkedIn, and just like you said, I saw a lot of consultants posting, not a lot of people in the space posting, which is not a bad thing. The consultants are providing great information. I love the things that they're providing, but it's distinctly different on the ground. I've done both. I've done consulting and I've done, on the ground work right at a nonprofit. And it is distinctly different being the execution side of a lot of the strategies and tactics that you bring consultants in to help with. And so I felt like, providing that viewpoint of on the ground execution would really help people in the space with that goal of, let's increase generosity as much as we can. So in 2018, I started just posting on LinkedIn. I just said, I'm going to share little things I've learned. And honestly, I'm not that special. I've just had some really great mentors, teachers, our agency, BBS and Associates. I've worked with them a long time. And Dale Berkey there, just a longtime mentor of mine, and taught me, a ton about fundraising. I came into the space understanding a little bit about marketing and a lot about digital and not knowing fundraising. And so that side I really had to learn. So I really felt like, by teaching folks that are on the ground like I am, the things that I've learned from other people, other mentors that have been in the industry a long time, that I could help them, take that next step and become really excellent fundraisers. The wide variety of things that I'm doing, it really comes back to something that my friend Mike Myers, my boss at World Concern and longtime leader at Food for the Hungry, he told me, you got to educate people, but you got to inspire them and entertain them. And if you don't have those other pieces, then people will enjoy the education, but especially in this space, there's not a lot of inspiring and entertaining, especially in the entertaining side of things. And so I really thought through, like, what could entertain people in the nonprofit space. And so part of it was kind of the absurdities that we all see in life. And, you see this in any profession, but taking those kind of absurdities and, making fun of ourselves a little bit in our industry could be a fun thing. And so I started initially with that little comic strip, and I just said, what are some of the crazy things that I've heard over the years or seen other nonprofit fundraisers say that they've seen or heard, and turn those into that comic strip. And then later, every kind of Christmas break, I come up with a project that I want to do. And the last couple of Christmases, it was write a book, and little project over Christmas break, or at least start writing a book. But this last one, I said, I don't want to write a book right now. And so I had for years thought about doing an animated version of Dave, the Development Director. And that's what Spur and I went out and found a way to do that over Christmas break. And it really turned out much better than I thought it would. And hopefully something that people in the space really enjoy and can see that they're not in it alone. Like when they run into a situation and someone says, hey, the air conditioner is broke, can you go raise a gob of money to fix the air conditioner? That that's not that actually happened. Some of these things are things that have actually happened in my life where people have said these things. And so to let people know that they're not alone and that we are all experiencing some of these crazy things in the nonprofit industry.
I think my favorite was the Sarah
McGatlinburg.
Yes.
Character. Yeah.
For Animal Charity. The song that was lovely. But can you talk about Dave, the Development Director? Who's he inspired by?
Yeah, so Dave is kind of a mixture of different people that I've known over the years. I wouldn't say by myself, but some of those experiences in there are things that I've personally experienced. Dave works at We Care, is a fictional nonprofit that he works at, and he goes through kind of these crazy situations, which it's funny because I've had a number of people, I put a little thing on the end that says this is fictitious and, should not be construed to be a real character, a real person or organization. And I've had many people say that is a lie. These are coming straight out of meetings that I've been in. And I think that's what resonates with people is some of those things are, based on real events or, kind of based on real events, but I've taken it to another absurd level. And some of them are actually things that I've seen happen at nonprofits. So I think it's this kind of, conglomeration of different people that I've met in the industry and said, what is the average development director looking at when they go to work every day, and what are some of the crazy situations that they get put in, and some of the interactions they have with people that really don't understand fundraising and think that it's easy to do.
Yeah, Dave is fun. He's like the every person, right? Like he's sort of your average development director, and sometimes put upon by senior management and trying to explain. I think Cut the Acquisition was particularly painful one to watch.
Yes.
So
thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've been really getting some good feedback on the series.
So Jeremy, I'm not going to ask you what you do in your free time, because I sounds like you just write books and produce cartoons, and I'm sure there's more to come. But I was thinking back to the book you released about a year ago, The Magnetic Nonprofit, and you talked about trends. So what are the nonprofit trends that you're seeing, and you think what has changed, what has stayed the same, what's happening in our space?
Yeah, really, really great question. So the one I'm most excited about right now is one that I think the for-profit side of the world has really already figured out, and that the nonprofit side is still working on is content marketing. And content marketing, not from the perspective of continually talking about how awesome we are, because we all know your organization's awesome. But when you talk about how awesome you are, at some point somebody tunes out. It'd be like going out on a date and having the person across from you just talk about how they're great at their job and how much what great work they do. And, you'd get bored pretty quickly. And I think, unfortunately, we fall, and I fall into this trap sometimes of talking so much about ourselves that we forget that the audience are these donors. So one example is at World Concern, we're releasing a podcast called End of the Road. And it's not about World Concern. It's about stories of people who have gone to the end of the road around the world, or people who live at the end of the road around the world. And what I mean by end of the road is when the road stops, and then you have got to figure out a way to get to that village or community you live in, that there is no road to them. So they don't have infrastructure, they don't have things. And I think it's just a really interesting use of content marketing where we're speaking to people about things that they may never experience themselves, but they get to hear these great stories of, there's a gentleman there that went to Bosnia in the 90s as a part of an organization, was literally camping out with refugees in these blown out homes to protect them, because when he was there, NATO had to protect these people. And so there's stories like that where you get to hear about some of the situations that have gone on around the world, and how people have stepped in to help. Where things I think are changing is, direct mail is not dead. I think organizations that think direct mail is dead have made a mistake. I think, I know from personal experience that, we're putting more money into direct mail acquisition this year than we did last, because it's still working and we're getting, really good payoffs. But where it's changing is, I think a lot more of people are going multi-channel. And so they might be, I know this has happened in the past, but it's, really accelerated since COVID, where people are receiving something in the mail, they're going online to give. You're sending them a text message, they're giving to an email, but they've got the text message to kind of spur them to go give. There's lots of ways that people are giving, but I think that even more so now, if you're not approaching campaigns from that multi-channel approach, then you're making a mistake, because people are giving that way. The other thing I think that is changing in the nonprofit industry is really slow to get behind is the frequency of communication. You need to be communicating more often than you are, and if you think that you're communicating enough, you probably aren't. So an example is, sending an email 4 times a month isn't enough. And you might think you're bothering people. And I would argue that that's not the case, because I've seen data at many nonprofits that if you're not emailing more frequently, I know some that are emailing 3 to 4 times a week, and they're seeing huge growth, 40-50% year-over-year growth in their digital income, because people want to hear that. And now what they're emailing is interesting, and it's not just an appeal 3 times a week. But people want to hear from them. And if you're not constantly top of mind of people, then you're not going to be able to, achieve your goals and to convert people to become donors.
Yeah. No, that's true. And, we ignore half of the communications we receive. So just because we sent 4 doesn't mean you actually saw, let alone read.
And internally, your staff are seeing it all, and they're reading it all, and they're like, "You're sending me so much stuff," but that's because they are paying attention and reading it all. And most people honestly don't. They just don't care that much. And I don't mean it like in a mean way, but they just don't. They don't read every single word of every single piece you send them. Like you said, they're reading half or 1/4 of what they're getting.
You're breaking my heart on that one there. Jeremy, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. You're my very first and hopefully not last guest. But this was Jeremy Reis, like the food. This was a wonderful conversation about fundraising. And I will make sure to share also the animated series with development director Dave. It's highly entertaining, and it's satire at its best. So, Jeremy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Olga.